Last Thursday, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley addressed the nation on the events culminating to that point in protest action on Tuesday and Wednesday prior. Now, before itemizing some of the steps taken to address the issue at hand, PM Rowley had these words for those who might want to dismiss the situation as something happening in a hotspot.
That term covers a multitude of undesirable life living. Most people in those areas have the same ambition, require the same service, require peace and prosperity. So hotspot and dismiss is not how we'll approach this. We'll approach it as special areas requiring special attention. And what that attention is going to be, we will put a little effort into finalizing the nature of the attention. But the first thing we will do is to draw on our national intellect and experience. Today, the Cabinet approved the establishment of this National Recovery Program, led by a team of persons whose skills will allow that program to determine the action plans for these areas. The team is to be led by the very experienced Mr. Anthony Watkins, a man who holds a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and who has spent his life working in the fields of social pathology, mental health, correctional services, and psychiatric forensic assessment. Qualified academically and qualified by years of experience. He would lead this team into these areas.
This evening, we are lucky to have the opportunity to speak with Chief Executive Officer, Principal Consultant of Odyssey Consult, Inc., and specifically for the purposes of this conversation, head of that recently appointed Community Recovery Program team, Mr. Anthony Watkins. Good evening, sir. How are you?
I am quite well, thank you, DK.
Very glad to have you on board for this conversation. Now, as team lead, though, if this team is part of the solution, what would you define as the problem?
Well, one of the things that we don't want to do, DK, is to step into a space where we have a preconceived notion of what the problem is. There are a number of events that have taken place. We understand the issues of crime. We understand unemployment. We understand a sense of disenfranchisement. We recognize the trauma that many people in these areas face. We look at issues of training and educational opportunities. So there's a plethora of things that are current and exist in the spaces that we're talking about. But you know, right alongside that, there are people who have been successful. There are businesses. There are people who are succeeding academically. So in a lot of ways, what we may see as the problem from outside of some of these areas may have a very different kind of reality when we begin to engage. So one of our critical things would be, while we look at some of those things I mentioned, we want to be careful and cautious about assuming that as we step in there, we know what we are going to fix. It's going to require a different kind of engagement.
And speaking of that engagement, the Prime Minister spoke of engaging with the intellect and experience that is local, that capacity that is from Trinidad and Tobago. What are some of the things that you like just from the outset, looking at the team that has been put together?
Oh, one of the things, of course, is that there's a significant amount of new thinking. As I've talked with some of those people, there's an understanding, of course, of some of the generational issues, some of which I may be a little distant from some of those things. But certainly the question of familiarity with the area. Some of the people have been rooted in and have grown up in the area. Some have connections in there. Some have experience working in there. And importantly, coming from a different range of career experiences. So that in a lot of ways, what we're seeking to do here is to bring a range of perspectives, along with the perspectives of the people in the communities, to begin to pull together what is a sense of, what is this thing that we're grappling with? What was it 5 years ago? What is it now? What is it? Where is it heading? And therefore, how do we begin to take some immediate action, some medium, and then put some things in place for longer term action on these things.
And following on to that last statement, I know you spoke about the dangers of being prescriptive going into this situation, but how do you plan to approach this situation as you see it?
Very carefully. Well, let me say that we're going to be meeting tomorrow to explore, to get a sense, a brief of our terms of reference, to probe those, to understand what are the expectations of the government relative to the team. And of course, we will then sit, give what our own experiences are and our own, our competencies and the skill that we bring to it. So we will spend some time doing that and really ask ourselves, what can we do now? What does the country need? What do the people in the community need? And what are the things that will really shape us to go forward in a way that's positive? So it really is, in a lot of ways, a kind of the starting point is going to be a point of reflection. And, from my own practice in terms of psychology, counseling, intervention in communities and in organizations, you really want to be careful and to pause prior to stepping in there and seeing what's to be done. This is going to be a process, DK, not of experts coming in to fix something, but really collaborating with the communities in terms of shaping and, as I describe it, co-engineering some of the solutions going forward.
I want to ask you on a personal level, what are some of the reflections, what are some of the conversations that you had with yourself and your inner circle when asked to carry this responsibility?
Well, one of the big pieces for me was the question of integrity. And integrity for me, DK, is a nexus between a couple of things. What do I believe? If I say something, is it consistent with what I believe and what I do? What I do consistent with what I say? And I kind of chuckled as I shared with people that, many times friends and I would spend long hours talking about the situation, discussing what some of the possible solutions are, and really thinking that we had the solution to the problem. And then you get a call. And the integrity piece then is, if you've been talking about this thing, if you say you committed to this, if you tell yourself that you're a nationalist and working in the public and national interest, everybody's interest, when you get a call like that, do you answer the call or do you say, no, it's inconvenient? Well, even if it's inconvenient, I think time now is a time for people to stand up, to step up, to speak up, and to do what they can do to begin to make the situation a little better. And the one conversation I had was, hey, you've been saying a lot of things about this. Are you going to walk the talk? Are you going to step in, take up the challenge, and do what has to be done?
And sometimes the best coaches you get and sometimes the best players are watching from a couch or from the sidelines, and when called to walk that talk, you see something a little different happening. No,
yeah, they can't play the game, but they could talk it.
Definitely. But yes. do you find it a little different saying, okay, well, I'm dealing with a community because you've done work for organizations, businesses, you've done work outside. What are some of the differences you say, okay, well, we are dealing on the ground, on the streets with individuals from a community as opposed to a business?
Well, let me just expand a little in terms of what we do as an organization. While our formal organizational work as it is with organizations and things like that, we have done, when it comes to our core values, we have a value of social consciousness. And there's a lot of work that we do in communities, with NGOs, with CBOs, with faith-based organizations, which really speak to people out there in terms of where they are. A lot of the service clubs, we work with them. So we're not unfamiliar with working out there. I mean, even for example, on some construction projects, if you have to do an environmental impact assessment, it means going out there, talking with people in the community. So we are not strangers to that kind of process. So we will be prepared to do that. I mean, there's some work that we have done. There's some work that I have done in that area. And as I talk with the people on the team, there's a massive amount of experience that people in the team have in terms of doing that kind of work. We've also, DK, very interestingly, we've been, the groundswell, and I must say the response and the support and the offers of support have been overwhelming.
And I want to continue with the conversation of that offer of support, because sometimes it's one thing to say, okay, well, they're sending these people, as opposed to
Yes.
saying, this is something that resonates with me and I can latch on to. But we continue that conversation. When we return, we also want to address the use of language and terminology. Anthony Watson, we are going to be continuing this conversation when we return. Stay with us. Anthony Watkins, rather. Stay with us. Welcome back to the TTT News. We are speaking with a founding member of HERMAT, a group we have been speaking with for the last 3 weeks. He's also the head of the Community Recovery Program team, Anthony Watkins. Now, when we took the break, you started speaking about the fact that you haven't had a meeting as yet, but there's been an outpouring of invitations or people actually saying, well, I can help this way, I can help that way. Give me a little more, or explain that a little more, and also I'm wondering, how has that made you feel thus far?
Sometimes, if your hand isn't in the lion's mouth, you don't really understand what is happening. And while I understand that a number of people and people in my circle want to do something and feel positively about it, the responses that I've got have said to me that the interest, the desire to see something different, one, but to do something in order to achieve that something different, that there's a massive groundswell out there in terms of that stuff. So the issue is, even if 10% of the people who offer support actually deliver, we are in a good place in terms of what can be done. Now, the support comes in all kinds of ways. Some people will say, listen, we're praying for you all. And that's important. Some people will offer things that their organization can do. There are programs that our people have executed. People can say, listen, I don't know what I can do, but I have some time and I have some skills. I'm prepared to bring that. Organizations have said, hey, listen, we may be prepared to sponsor some aspects of some things that we do. So it has been a range of definitions or dimensions of what we could consider support, but it's real, and I feel it very strongly, and it's very encouraging.
Now, with regard to the terminology that I hinted that we'd be getting to, I want to know what's in a name, and what's the significance to you of the Prime Minister refusing to define these events as hotspot activity?
You know, DK, language carries, it denotes some things, but there are also connotations that go with it. Words do have power to lift or to bring people down. And people have some meanings that they attach to words. There are words and sounds that come out, and we hear certain kinds of things. And we have to be very careful about that in terms of when we call something a particular name, there's something that comes up inside of us why we use the term, but there's also something that happens with people to whom that term is used. We have to be absolutely clear. You know, in the business that I do in terms of human development, we use the notion, for example, of self-talk and the power of language in things like this. And we understand how powerful that could be. We understand, for example, in terms of some of the trauma that people may have experienced, there are times when people are not able to express what they're feeling, so they start to, really just kind of tension builds up inside them, and then they kind of explode. So the inability to put things into words and into words that are appropriate is a critical issue. We have to be extremely careful about that, what we say, how we say it, and how we begin to engage. We also have to be careful about when we engage with people in the community, when we hear them say something, we have to be sure that we understand what that means. Because coming from outside the community, there are things that we understand by a particular word. They may be meaning something different. This is going to be a very delicate walk initially. And of course, as that language thing and some of our actions roll out, the issue of trust and a relationship with people in the community, so that we begin to do some things that are to their benefit and to the benefit of the wider society.
And to your point, the Prime Minister said that you would be able to bring in individuals as need be. Sometimes you may even want someone who not necessarily translate, but understands the nuance of words and language as used to be able to articulate things like that. Is that something, I know you said you haven't had your first meeting as yet, you're going to have it very shortly, but is that something you've already started thinking about?
Yes, well, I listen to the language of the younger people on the team, and they speak a language that's slightly different from mine. There are some generational issues here, but there is that. And in terms of co-opting may be a full-time co-opting into the team. There may be people who have done work who we say, listen, we need this person on this team, for the long haul. It may be that we co-opt people for a particular dimension of the process, or for a particular time in the process, or for a particular location during the process. So a lot of that, once we delve into our terms of reference and define what we're going to do and begin to map out what our work plan is, then we can begin to decide, in a sense, who we will pull in and on what kind of terms. Of course, people have volunteers, and we certainly respect and value that.
Now, you've spoken about some of the positive groundswell that you've had. Do you foresee any challenges? Because off the bat, I can see someone saying, better cock than you crew. What are you bringing to the table that's a little different?
Yeah, well, there are a couple of ways that I respond to that, DK. And one of them is a Zen perspective that says, you never step into the same river twice. We can say that we're dealing with the same communities with the same issues. And I would say that that's not quite accurate. There are some differences now. This is a COVID, in COVID and almost post-COVID era. This is a time of absolutely low and depressed oil and gas prices. This is a time where a lot of other things have happened, almost a kind of tension in communities and an adversarial approach with other agencies outside of the community. So while these things have happened, there's a quality and a texture to what's happening now that's a little different. Are there some opportunities that are different? Have we done things before? Yes, there are things that have been done before. Can we revisit? Yes, we may. Can we revise? Can we adopt and adapt them? Yes, we can. So my point is, at this time, I'm looking at this as an venture where, yes, we will be guided, we'll take cognizance of some of stuff that has gone before. But some of that may not be as appropriate now as it ought to be. And in that sense, we have to be, in a sense, careful about how much we listen to the past. In many ways, the past can imprison us into certain kinds of things. And the other side to this is that sometimes you're doing some work, it might be a boulder, and somebody has a sledgehammer and they're busy trying to burst this boulder, and they keep pounding, and people say, boy, you're not making any progress. And somebody comes, and the last blow on that boulder is not the blow that causes it to split open. It is all the other work that has been done. So we're going to be looking at the other work that has been done, valuing and respecting that work, but also asking ourselves, what might we want to do that's a little different? What might we want to do that's significantly different? And how might we want to engage in ways that are different? So it's going to be a real learning experience, and we have to say, we are not coming in there as experts to fix a problem. We are coming in there to work with the community, engage with them to understand, and sometimes even to be able to translate for the community what they want to say to the rest of the national community.
I appreciate you using the story of the stonecutter, because that also brings to mind the idea of perseverance, which will be very necessary. Now, we have about a minute left, and I want to get to something that you wrote an article in about 2018, I think. You said making a change
I forgot about that, DK.
You said making a change is one thing, but
yes.
How do you foresee having that change, but transitioning towards transformation?
All right. Now, in a lot of ways, so if we think about where people are right now is a painful time, and there are pain points. We can say that people are bleeding. People are saying they can't breathe. And what do you do in a situation like that? The immediate need is to stop the bleeding. The immediate need is to administer CPR. The immediate need is to treat some problems that are causing pain in the now. But even as we do that, we have to talk about, so what is this going to be like? What kind of life do you want further down the road? And to begin to speak to that, but also taking some steps along the way It's not about getting better in the now, but doing better in the short term to experiencing a vastly different kind of future down the road. You know, the truth is, if we think about some of our communities, and people will tell you, there's a reason why Success Village was named Success Village.
And definitely, this is a conversation that
successes.
hopefully this is just the start of it. So we will be with you along this process. But Mr. Watkins, we want to thank you so much.
I look forward to that. Yes.
Definitely.
Yes.